Okay, sorry about that. Sorry, Nick. So, anyways, but with that, we'll get into the meat of the presentation.
Which one do you tweet on?
Actually, I have more than one handle. I typically every morning, I will do about the same number between it just depends on how many. If I see more like general like tech stuff, I'll do more on the Polygon engine. But if it's more like JavaScript or Node TypeScript related stuff, web stuff, I typically do that on the Jaxnode one. So I used to have it synced into our homepage for the user group, but I don't have that hooked up anymore. All right, so let me go back here. All right, so I just want to cover some basics here about React. So just to show a hand, how many people here use React or have used React? Okay, good. All right. So for those who haven't, React is essentially it's a Vue framework, and it's primarily used as kind of like being like the client side part of an application, but it's turning into being a lot more of a full-on framework for a lot of different platforms. Like it started off as being a web-specific thing, but now it's being used like Microsoft, ironically enough, is using it a lot to build Windows applications and cross-platform applications. And generally, you kind of compose your React applications with these JSX or TSX files. And this is kind of like the basic, format here. You'll have like a function that you can export. And then what you can do is you can include like another function. And then the key thing here is that if you look at this, it's like one of the things that's unique about JSX and TSX is that you can actually embed your HTML into your functions, which is something that was like before React came out, that was considered to be kind of like an anti-pattern. But it's become popular because of React. And now there's a lot of different frameworks that you can use that are essentially doing the same thing, doing component-based like UI. So Swift UI in the Apple world is kind of like become like the standard UI library now in the Apple ecosystem. And it's essentially leveraging a lot of the same stuff in Swift UI. And then the same thing, if you're doing Android development, they have a UI framework called Compose that works essentially the same way. So you can kind of compose these different pieces and then build your UI out of these different pieces. So quick history here is that it started off as being a Facebook project back when Facebook wasn't Meta, back in 2013. And one of the reasons for that is that at Facebook, they do not like MVC. And so like the very common pattern for building web applications was to use the model view controller framework type of, these types of frameworks that use model view controller. And Facebook has never liked that approach. So they open sourced the project back in 2014. Then React Native was introduced back in 2015. It's hard to believe that framework is 10 years old now. They still haven't gotten 1.0. And it started off as being kind of like a component class, framework. And then they moved to functional components and hooks back in 2019. And so more recently, just in the last year or so, has seen the rise of React server components. And the thing that's neat about server components is it's this whole idea where you can either statically generate some components so they can just be served up from the server rather than have to render them on the client. So there's a lot of different ecosystems and ways that you can build. So React being kind of like mainly like a front end type technology for like building out applications. A lot of times, a lot of these different toolkits like Redux and MobX and Zustan and Jotai can be married to your React applications to kind of handle the business logic or whatever with your application. React Native has become very popular for doing all kinds of native applications. It started off as being like an iOS and then an Android thing, but it's like I said, there's people that are building Mac applications and Windows applications using React Native now. Vite's also become a very popular tool for not just for scaffolding, but also for like handling like your builds and all of your like Babel type of transpilation with your applications. Vite's become very popular for that. And to the point now where the Create React app, which was kind of like the standard way of like generating like a new React application, this officially been deprecated. They're saying don't even bother using that. If you just wanted to spin up like a simple like front end React site, use Vite to do that. Next.js is also becoming very popular. It's technically it's a server side and client side framework, but it's become a very popular framework. It's competing with Express as being like a very popular Node.js type of framework. And the founder of React Router and Remix, he's actually taken those two different frameworks and merged them together into a single framework. And so you can do a lot of the same types of things that you can do with Next.js with Remix. And so the company where we currently work right now, it's like we use React Router, but we actually are making the transition to Next.js. So Next.js 15 has full support for React 19. And what's interesting about that was anybody that followed the news with React 19, like React 19 was, I think, officially announced like kind of like in the spring of last year. But there were some issues they were having with how they handled suspense in the framework. And so they didn't officially release the framework until December of last year. So it's only been about 2 months since React 19 has officially been released. But Next.js, when they went to 15, one of the things they did was they married React 19 with Next.js 15. And they were actually released Next 15 before React 19 was officially released. So they actually had like a beta version in the original version of Next 15 that they released. And so I know like a lot of people are just like, I don't know if I want to use a framework that's using a beta version of another framework and stuff like that. But like I had a big discussion at my job where I was talking, it's like, I don't know about using Next 15 because React 19 hasn't come out yet. And literally just later on that same day, they officially announced the release of React 19. So that problem was solved. So talking a little bit about React being like a front end. So one of the nice things about React is that you don't have to use it with Next or Remix. You can use it with any backend. And so Greg, we were just talking about using .NET with .NET as the backend and then React as the front end. That's very similar to what my company's doing right now. So you can use Java, Golang, Flask, Laravel, any of these frameworks as the backend, and then you can marry it to React on the front end. React can also be served up statically. So we were talking a little bit about Gatsby earlier. And one of the things that's nice about Next.js is that you can actually use it to kind of create a static, website that they can be deployed to like S3 bucket or something like that. And you don't have to worry about having like a backend server to be able to serve things up. And then there's all kinds of different services like Firebase and Quark that you can also marry it with React. So all those different services, a lot of times when you go and look at some of these services online, they'll in their API documentation, they'll show you this is how you get it to work with React. And so there's a lot of support for React with all the different services and stuff that are available. This brings us to React 19. So there's some pretty cool features here in React 19. Hold on one second while I find this a little bit annoying here with this widget. All right, there we go. So some of the new things that are in React 19 is this whole concept of actions, which allow you to use async functions that can also be used with transitions for handling pending states, errors, and forms. They've also added a bunch of really cool new hooks, like there's the use action state hook, which allows you to put in like it simplifies like the way you manage form states and submissions. There's use form status, which is a hook that you can use that'll help you manage the status of a form submission. There's also the use optimistic hook, which allows you to do optimistic UI updates during async data mutations. And there's also server components, which we were talking about a little bit with Next. That's now officially part of the React framework. So some of the other new features, there's a new use API, which allows you to kind of read resources like promises. And in fact, you could actually, you wrap, like I say, a promise that you have with the use, and then it can be reused, the context has to be within a render function. But it's still considered experimental at this point. Something else that's really cool is that they've added a ref as a prop. So that eliminates the need for having to use forward ref. Anybody that's had to deal with forward ref, I think will appreciate this. There's improved error handling in the framework as well. And they also have support for document metadata, where you can use like the title, the link, and the meta tags directly in your components. And it will automatically hoist those values into essentially the head of your web application. It's a very cool feature. They also have enhanced asset loading for preloading scripts for doing things like loading up fonts and style sheets, that sort of thing. And then another really cool feature is they've added this thing called the React compiler. And so what's really neat about the React compiler, it's like the company I was working at last year, we got real excited when we heard about this, because littered throughout all of our code, we're using use memo and use callback throughout our application to prevent re-renders. And one of the things that's nice about the React compiler is if you start using the React compiler, essentially it will automatically add this as part of the transpilation step so that you don't have to. So essentially it goes through there, it figures out where like a re-render would occur, and then it applies the use memo and use callback hooks in there. So at this point, I think that's it's definitely considered production. And to use it, all you have to do is to make sure you're using the ESLint plugin. And then there's a plugin you can use with ESLint that allows you to use the compiler. And to make the modification, all you have to do is come into your ESLint config file, and then add a plugin reference for the React compiler, and then add a rule. So as far as upgrading goes, you can just install React 19 and React 19 DOM. They also have code mods that you could use for handling the upgrade. So you can run this npx code mod React 19 migration recipe, and it'll go through and do a lot of the work for essentially upgrading your React app. Make sure that you, if you're using Git, that you create like a brand new branch to do that in. That's because it may mess some things up. So you may need to be able to throw away a branch if you have to. Also, the errors in render now are not rethrown. And then they've taken the prop types and default props, which have been deprecated. And so there's a code mod for replacing prop types if you're using TypeScript. So with the module pattern factories, one of the things you'll see here, this is something else that changed. Like it used to be with with that pattern that you would do like a return render in order to be able to output your HTML. But they have modified it, so now you can just do return and then whatever the element or set of elements that you're returning. So they've simplified that with React 19. Forms and actions. So something else that's also changed, and a lot of this is really coming from Next.js and a lot of things that have been kind of like pulled into Next.js. But Next.js, they added support last year for something called server actions. And if you haven't worked with or seen server actions, essentially what they allow you to do is kind of define functions that run on the server. And they also have a lot of new hooks that you can use to take advantage of these features. And they also have actions that you can use instead of having to use the on submit for a form submission. So this is another feature that I like, is that you can actually specify an action instead of trying to write a function to handle the on submit and then overload the prevent default event, prevent default. You don't have to do that. You can just handle this as an action. And they have 3 hooks that have all been added to help support this functionality. There's the use optimistic, use action state, and use form status. These can all be used to enhance your forms in your React applications. So with the actions, it's now part of the React DOM API. You can use an action prop on the form itself. So for instance, like if you're specifying a form element, you just would specify the action attribute and then assign which function that you want to use to be able to handle essentially a form submission. And then if you're using, let's say, like an input or a button, and you want to also be able to kick off one of those functions, you'd use a form action prop instead. So it's action on the form attribute, and then on the individual elements, you can kick it off by using a form action prop. And then once the form succeeds, one of the things I'll do is I'll reset the form for you. You can also call request form reset off of the React DOM API if you need to. So the use transition hook is handy because it allows you to not only kick off, let's say, some type of process, but it also assigns a is pending value. So if you need to be able to disable elements while you are running a function, you can use this hook in order to not just kick off the transaction, but also keep an is pending state, so that if you need to disable, let's say, the submit button as an example, it'll disable it while this transition's been running. And then they also have async transitions. Those are called actions. So here's an example of kind of like the old way before actions. So if you look at this, if you look at the very top of this, you can see that they're using a use state a whole bunch in here. And so there's a use state for setting the name, there's a use state for setting the error, and then there's another use state for setting the pending. And then inside of the handle submit, there's all this boilerplate code in there for, setting, okay, is pending, set that to true, run the update, and then set the is pending to false, and then you're doing something for doing the error checking, and then it does its redirect. And a lot of this has been simplified now to where, here in this example, they're still using the use state for the set name and the set error, but now they're using this use transition. And so what's nice about this is that if you look at this example right here, you can see that there's this start transition, which just takes a function. And then what that function's doing is it's actually going and running its update. But all the is pending stuff is all handled by the transition. So inside of the button on click, as an example, we have that disabled with the is pending that's coming from the transition. And then there's the use action state hook. And this is the one I like a lot. And that's because one of the things that's nice about this one is that if you are using a framework, let's say like Next.js as an example, one of the common patterns that I like with web applications is that, on that first, page request, I want to get as much stuff up front that, I can deliver to the user as possible. But then if they want to, let's say, maybe do like some type of, synchronous, like callback to, get some additional information, maybe they want to do like let's say a stock update on the page. You can then, use this this hook to essentially get updates, and then it'll update the same state that was passed when you created the page in the first place. And so with this example, one of the things that they're doing here is that they're creating essentially a copy of the state. They have a form action that you can then use to kick off the action. And they also have a is pending value that gets set as well. And so all you have to do here is you just, in the use action state, you just basically pass in a function, the initial state, and then you can even have a permalink. So if you need to have it go somewhere, hey, if you need to have it go somewhere, once it's completed the action, you can do that as well. And then that function you pass in there actually takes in two different parameters. The first parameter is the previous state, and then you have form data that you can then use to handle however you want with the function.
So the parameters I will pass in initial state if I wanted to pass parameters.
Yes. So the whole idea here is that let's say you're going to render this component for the first time, and then you want to go in and let's say modify it after it's already been pulled down to the page. You can do that using this function. I actually have a pretty cool example of how this works here that I'll demo here in a little bit. So this is a very simple example. And as a matter of fact, this is one of the examples that I have here. And so in this example, what I'm doing here is I have a function here, an asynchronous function at the very top, which just increments the state. So it takes the previous state and then it just adds 1 to that. And then in the use action state hook, I'm just passing that action in, and then I'm passing 0 as my initial state into that hook. And then what it's going to do is it's going to actually give me like an actual state value that I can then use inside of my form. And then I just take the form action and I assign it to this button's form action property. And that brings us to the use form status hook. And this hook, I think it's a real convenience. So if you are creating, let's say, a child component that maybe has like a button, and then you want to be able to check to see if something is pending, as an example, but you don't want to have to do like a forward ref into that component to keep track of something that's been coming out that's mapping inside the parent function. What's nice about this is that it can track all this stuff for you, so it simplifies building these components. So here's a very simple example. Here's a submit button. And then what I'm doing here is that I'm actually just calling the use form status, getting the status, and then I'm checking the status.pending and assigning that to the disabled attribute on the button. So now in this form, when I go to submit the form, I don't have to do like a forward ref into this component in order to be able to check to see whether or not the form is still pending. And this is part of the React DOM API. It's not part of the React API. This is another cool hook, the use optimistic hook. What this hook essentially lets you do is it lets you set things optimistically. So let's say you are going to, let's say, update a name as an example on a record in, let's say, a database, right? Well, it may take a little while to get like a successful message back. So what you can do is you can actually say, okay, this is what this should be once this function finishes running. And then what I'll do is once it's complete, you can then update it once it's complete. But this allows you to start setting values and stuff before you've gotten the update back from the server. So it allows you to immediately render things while you may have a process kind of running asynchronously. So here's a very simple example here. So here's one where we have a component for changing a name. It's passing in the current name and then an on update name method or function that you can call on it. And then we're using the use optimistic hook here at the beginning of it, and it's taking in the current name. And so here on the submit action, what it's actually doing is it's grabbing the name off of the form data, and it's using the set optimistic name to actually set that value. So it's setting the value here so that it displays on the view, but then it's calling the update name to actually perform that in the back end. And then once that's complete, you can call the on update name and it sets that. And I have an example of that I'm going to show here a little bit later. Another feature that's now officially part of React, that's actually been part of Next.js for about a year or so, is React server components. And so, like I said, this has been supported in Next for a while. It's now officially part of React. It allows you to render components on the server and then push them to the browser. This is something that's also sometimes referred to as SSR, or server-side rendering. And these can also be used without a server. So if you are doing something like building out like a static website, like you might have done with Gatsby in the past, you can actually pre-render components so that they just get served directly down to the browsers, but statically. There's also the new Use API, which I talked about earlier. And this is mainly usually for being able to read resources inside of the render. So you can read a promise with the Use API, and it will suspend until the promise actually resolves. You can't create a promise in the render and then try to pass it to that promise. And you also will need to use a suspense power library that supports caching of promises if you want to use this. So here's an example here of a function here that is getting a promise passed to it, and then here on the line just below that, it's actually using the use from React, and it's passing in the comments promise. And then it's inside of the suspense. It actually will then try to use the comments promise. Something else I talked a little bit earlier is the ref prop. And so now ref is officially an attribute that can be passed into a component. This eliminates the need for having to use forward ref. And there's also a code mod that'll help you go through and remove all of your forward refs from your code. But like I said before, create a new branch before you do that. Document metadata is also a neat feature here. And so here, you can actually specify title or link or meta tags inside of your client-side components, and it'll actually hoist those values up to the head of your application. So this is very handy. For instance, like you may want to have like a different title for different views inside of your application. And so now you can set that inside of your client components, and you don't have to worry about using something like helmet as an example for setting these values. It's all built into React now. And this is also a great feature for SEO. So if you're having to use like meta tags and that sort of thing, you can take advantage of that as well. And they also have support for async sync tags with this as well. You can also now preload resources. And so there's a couple different functions you might have used inside of your web pages, like prefetch DNS, pre-connect, preload, pre-init. These are now all part of the React DOM. And this can be used to dramatically enhance performance of your page loads. So here's an example here of if you look at the top, this is an example of how you can kind of use these inside of your component using the new API. And then if you look at the bottom, this is actually the HTML that gets produced by here. So the same thing, like if you're using a link for prefetch DNS or preload, pre-connect, this all gets automated by this new API. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and start demoing. So I have an application here I built in Next.js, but using React 19. And so I'm going to pull up that app here, just so we can see it real quick. And so if we look at this here, I have like a couple, like 8 different examples here. And so the first thing I did is I wanted to kind of demo like React server components and how that works and why that's pretty cool. So if we look at this first one right here, this has a page that's RCS. Yeah. So here's the page here. And you can see what I'm doing here is I have a server component here. And then what I'm doing here is that at the top here, I have a function here called get data, which is going out to get some aviation weather data. And what I'm doing is I'm calling that here inside of this page. And then once I get that data, I'm actually taking that and I'm passing that into this component here. So if I look at this component, this is just a regular, component that you use inside of React. But if I come here to the web page and I click on this is all getting loaded directly from the server. So there's no actual rendering that's happening on the web page itself.
Can you do networking tab?
Yeah.
Do network?
Let's do this. Inspect. So I'll just go here and reload that. And oops. So we can see right here, there's no like, there is since we're using HMR, there is some HMR in here, but there's no calls that are being made back. It's all just, it's rendering, it's getting all this data in the server, and then it's just delivering it down as a single page onto the server. It's very similar to like how like Gatsby would work if you're doing a static page, but here it's actually just delivering it directly from the server. So the next example I have here is, this is kind of like just your regular like classic counter here. So if I come right here, like for instance, if you're using bout to generate like a brand new React application from scratch, this is kind of like the example they have when you're going to run this. If I actually come here and take a look at the code for this, one of the differences that we'll see here is if I come to classic page here, we can see here that there is a classic counter function in here. So if I drill down into that and look at this, if you look at the very top here, you'll see that I have this header here called use client. And basically what that's doing is that's telling Next that this component, when I load this component, I actually want this to actually load and render in the browser as opposed to trying to generate this on the server side. And the reason, there's a number of reasons why you might want to do this. So if you have an interactivity inside of your components where you may do callbacks to the server and just kind of update things incrementally inside of your application, this is an example where you want to do that. The other reason here is that if you look right here, I'm using this use state hook. And you cannot use hooks inside of a server component. You can use them in client-side components, but you can't use them in server components. And so in order to take advantage of the use state hook, I have to be able to do this, which is fine. For this component, it works fine as like a client-side thing. But in order to get this to work as a client-side component, I did have to specify this header so that Next knows that this needs to be handled on the client as opposed to the server. So
By default, would it be use server, or by default it would be use client?
by default, it tries to render everything to the server. And like I said, there's reasons where you want to do that and reasons where you don't want to do that. One of the things that we found, and one of the apps that I'm working on right now, is that we essentially were doing almost everything client side. So it's like we have to push down all the different, routes, all the different, JavaScript, all the different Reacts in our whole application. On that first page request, that whole thing has to come down. And this is why I'm personally not a fan of SPA applications or single page applications. And the reason why is because you have to kind of like take everything, kind of compress it down as much as you can, and then load the entire application on that first page request. And so what's nice about some of these newer frameworks like Remix and Next.js is that now you can do page-specific rendering. So you can just include the components that you need for that specific page request. And it works better with SEO. As an example, because now you have actual like page routes that you can use. So the next example here is a combination of the action and use transition. So with this example here, I'm just going to pass in a name value here. And then what it's actually going to do is it's actually going to use a server action to send this data back to the server, and then it's going to send a response back. And so if I click at that, you see it took about a second for that to get the response back. And then if I come in and I click this again, you see it failed because I didn't pass any data inside of here. And so the way that works, if I come here into the app and then I go to, see, what was the route? Action. So if I come here to action, look at this page right here, we can see here I have this action form example. And then if I drill down into that, we can see here that I am using the use transition hook here. And then I'm also importing this update name from my app actions here. So if I come here and I take a look at the actions that I have here, you can see I have this update name here. And one of the things you'll notice here is that at the very top of here, I've also added a header because I'm telling Next that I want these functions to render on the server, right? So I have a client-side component that's now able to call server-side code. So if I come back here to that example, and we look at this, so we have a form here, and that form, I'm passing in the submit action, which I've defined up here. And if we look at this, it's taking in, form data, and then it's grabbing a value off of that, and then it's using the start transition here. And so one of the things that's nice about the start transition is that it actually, using this API, it gives me an is pending value that I can use. And then so what I'll do is that is pending state will be true until this transition completes. But then I'm just passing in an asynchronous method here. And then once it gets its result here, it sets the result name. If there's an error, then it sets the error. So pretty simple.
And also for what we're hide, your interactions with the API, which would be nice to.
That's true.
When it's happening on the server side, and there's definitely some performance gains to be had there, and we'll just doing it on the server.
So another cool hook is the use optimistic hook. And so this is what I was talking about before about where you can kind of set things optimistically. And then it may take a while for them to actually, your back end or whatever for that value to get updated. So here's an example of how this works. So I can come over here, I can pass in a name here, send that, and you can see right there for a little split second there, it's specified sending. So it's letting the user know that, okay, as I set this optimistically, I'm specifying sending there at the end. And then once it's finished updating, then I can actually go and update the value. I'm gonna do that here a couple more times. And to see how this works, what I'm actually doing here, let me go back to, we go to our components here. I have this thread component here. And if we look at this, this is probably one of the more complex examples that I did, but I have everything kind of wrapped up here inside of this thread wrapper. So I am using useState here to kind of set an array of objects there. And then I have this send message. What the send message is doing is it's actually calling this deliver message function here, which is also a server-side function that I created. So if I come over here, I can see we have this deliver message. All the deliver message does is it sets a timeout and then passes the string back. So it's very simple.
When you say server side, so is it like an HTTP protocol?
Yes.
The client and the server?
Yes. And I will, since you had me bring up the tools before, let me actually bring that up here so we can take a look at that. So if we look at the dev tools here as an example, we should see those HTTP requests in here. Actually, let me just figure that out. And I'm going to pass in Dave. And now if I come back here, I'm not seeing a networking request. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here, but
I see an error below that invalid frame.
uncut error and promise. I think that's something else though. Image source. Well, rather than debug that here, it may be easier to show a different example to see how that's working. But the key thing is, if we look at the code for this, what's actually happening here is that in the actual thread component itself, you can see here I'm using a use ref here. It's the new feature in React. But I'm setting an optimistic message when that form action is clicked. So what it's doing here is that in the when it's going to run the add optimistic message as an example here, what it's doing is it's adding that to this array. And then inside of here, we can see that on the message, when it's getting the optimistic message, it's actually adding the sending here into the example. So as the message has a sending state, it specifies this sending here. And then once it's no longer in that state, then it basically will just drop it off of the UI. So it manages all that stuff for you.
Quick question on,
Yeah.
If you were to do that in a text or just an input, right? Because it looks like you're kind of turning it into a label with the sending on there, right?
Yeah.
Could you run in any sort of, I guess like a race condition, if that promise, you have latency happening, that promise hasn't resolved, you were typing in that box, you continue typing, like you hit send David, and then that's off, maybe taking 10 seconds, and you keep typing in there, when that promise resolves, is it gonna pave whatever you type in there?
Yeah, I think that would cause a race condition. But that's a good reason to use, let's say, like a what's it called? There's a function I know you can use in Lodash, for example, that you can use to track like as you're typing. So like you can have it set up so that it doesn't actually submit anything back to the server until the users stop typing for like a couple seconds or
Yeah,
minutes.
like a debounce, right?
Debounce is what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, say you did type, and you had a half-second debounce and it still sent it. The fact that the network latency is taking a while to come back, and you continue typing, like, how's it gonna diff those two, I guess?
Yeah, I think this is like more of a like
Don't do that.
yeah, don't do that. This is more like, okay, you've got a commit you're ready to make. Let's make the commit. We'll set this optimistically until the commit's finished. But yeah, yeah, I wouldn't try to continuously try to update it. And so this is an example here of the use state action. This is what was actually in the React docs. I have a better example of this coming up here shortly. But the way this works here is that if I come over here and take a look at, let's see here, action form example thing. No, that's just not it. Actually, let me just go to what was it? Use action state. Here we go. So we take a look at this, and I have this stateful form here. And what this is actually doing here is this is the same example I showed in the slide earlier where I have this increment function, and then I'm passing that into this use state action, and then I'm passing an initial state in here as well. So now I'm getting the state back out of that, and I'm getting a form action that I can now call inside of my form or button. So here I'm using the form action to actually call that. And then as I am pushing the button to increment it, it's now going and using this increment function to update the state. So it's a pretty simple example there. Here's an example of the use form status. So in this example, I'm just gonna come over here and type something here, and you have to look at this really quickly. But it just after I submitted that, it disabled it, and then it returned back to a submittable state after I did that, and that's using the use form status hook. So if we come here and take a look at the, see here, it's the submit button here. So this is literally all I'm doing here. I'm just importing in the hook. I'm grabbing the status using the use form status, and then I am specifying a different color here based off of whether or not the status is pending or not. And so I'm just grabbing that right off the hook. And in the parent form here, let's see if I can find that use form status here. If we look at this, so I am using some server actions here, but they're all pretty simple. And then I'm just passing the submit button here. I don't have to pass any refs in there. It's tracking all that automatically. So that's the nice thing about the use form status. And this is the last feature here is an example of the metadata. So if you look at the very top of the web page right here, you'll notice that, I generated this using the create next app. So it's using that for the title, and it's also using the Vercel icon for the logo here, but I actually want to be able to use the Jaxnode icon instead. And so in the application itself, if I come over here and I go to our metadata, so we're going to find that. Here we go. So here's the metadata. So if we look at this, in here, I've changed the icon to actually use a PNG file for the icon. And then I've also set the title tag here. So if I come back to the web page and I click on metadata, if you look at the top there, you'll see that it just changed the title and it changed the icon. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't see the top of the code. Is that doing that server side? So it's like paying server side and sending it down?
This is all React. So this is all happening on the client side. So it's like if you've used a Helmet before, it's doing all that for you. It's hoisting all that stuff into the DOM.
So it's happening, so that is happening on site. Is there a way to do that with server components where you could actually have the server send it over from the server that way?
Yeah, this is a server component that I'm running, but this will work client side as well. All right, and then for the last example here, I have if you remember the server side component, I have this component here that essentially is rendering out aviation weather here. And so this is all being served up from the server and then delivered directly to client. But what if I want to modify that so that if I come back to that same form and I have this, and I've just kind of surrounded it with pink here just to let you know that this has changed somewhat. But this is the same data that I queried before that we're seeing here. So essentially we got that on the server side, but this component now is a client-side component. And if I come over here and I enter in a different station ID, I can enter in Cecil Field, as an example, that's KVQQ. And if I hit that, there you can see it just updated that. And so it went out, made a request, got some new data, and then updated the data. If I come over here and I change this to Jacksonville International, run that, then you can see that now I've got the updated weather for Jacksonville International. So the way this is working is this is using the state action here. So if I come down to my weather form here and take a look at this, we can see that I am doing a server-side request. So I'm getting the default weather. The default weather in this case is I'm passing in Craig, which is my home airport right off of Atlantic Boulevard. And then what I'm doing here is that I am using this MEDAR search form. And so if I go and I drill down into that, you'll see if I look at the very top of this, this is actually a client-side component, right? So the form itself is actually client-side, but the data that I initially got was essentially retrieved on the server side. And so what I'm doing here is in the props for the search form, I'm actually just passing in that weather data. And then I have a definition here in TypeScript for that weather data. And then the neat thing is I'm using the use state action hook. And so what I'm doing here is now I have defined this new state value here for WX. That's essentially was the WX data that we're passing here as our initial data here. And then I'm passing in this get data form, or sorry, this get data function. And if we look at the get data function, the way this actually works is that this is taking in two parameters. The first parameter is for the actual initial state that we're passing in. And then the second parameter is, or what they call previous state. And then the second function is just the form data. So what I'm doing now is there's this station field on the form itself, and I'm just grabbing whatever ID that I type in there. And then I'm doing a fetch, getting the JSON request back. And then what I'm doing is I am returning that back out. So this becomes the new state. So now that I've done that, so what will happen is now since I'm using this WX, initially when I first rendered this form, the first value that came out was the value that I got from the server. But now when I call the function here, it's going to go and use this form action. It's going to send that station to it, and then it's going to retrieve new information, and it's going to get a new state value back. So rather than having to use a bunch of different use states to set my pending, my is pending and all that stuff like that, I have one hook now that I can use to rule them all. And that's now coming in here and updating that. And then I have this client medar, which is just a wrapper around the existing server side. So what's nice about Next is that if you have a client-side component and then you take a component you might have originally just picked, I'm going to just use this as a server-side component, you can actually have it set up so that you can use that server-side component as a child component in your client-side component. And what will happen is it automatically renders that as a client-side component. So it's automatically converted that server-side component to being a client-side component, just being a child inside this other. So the way it works, if you think like a hierarchy of, let's say, 3 components where you have a server-side component and then a child component that is a client component, any components that are now included inside of that client component are also going to be client components. So
Server can be at the top.
yes,
Once it's client, once you go client, it's client from then on down the chain.
that's true. There's some tricks you can
Right.
do to get around that. But yeah, that's generally the case. Yes.
Sort of paper with client one down there, could it still get preloaded data? Being that it was initially a server component, like as it kind of traverses through there?
Yeah, so what I'm doing here is I'm getting that data on the server side, passing it at the top level, it's a server, since it's server data, then I'm passing that into my client side component. So the client side component essentially already has it when it's going to render on the client side. So there's no, it doesn't have to go and do a use effect to get, some value, whatever. It's passed as a prop essentially into the component. So it's ready to go. Yeah.
It's like seed input data, but it can still be updated again, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so if I come back here to, let's see here. Let's do this. So we were talking a little bit before about the server functions and how those work. If we actually take a look at that, what's actually happening here, look at the response, is that it's passing in essentially an array back. So this is actually very similar to the actual like REST request that I'm actually calling here. But then if we look at the preview here and the way that it gets constructed, is that you can see here that it's a little bit different from like a standard like REST request that you would make it to a server. But here the same thing applies here. You can see that it's passing in. We look at the headers here. Let's see here. Yeah, here we go. So we can see that it's passing in a path. Here it's meter KJAX. And then it's getting the result back, and it's just returning back an array of medar data here. So this is stuff I have to look at before I go flying. So kind of important. So we don't wind up like a Delta flight in Toronto. All right. Too soon? All right. All right. And so something else that's really not related, but I was playing around with a new large language model. So one of the, I think everybody's seeing the stuff in the news about like DeepSeek, and a lot of these models now have, reasoning, and you can say, hey, write me a Python game in Snake as an example. And they've done somewhat, okay jobs in the past, but some of these newer models, the reasoning models, actually do a much better job. And so today, just as an experiment, I went on to XAI's Rock 3 that was just released, and I said, hey, write me a video game in JavaScript. And I want you also to do it in TypeScript and have it render as a React component. And so this is what it gave me. So I've got a little game here. I did modify it a little bit, but if anybody's familiar with 1980s video game, this is Asteroids. So I just asked it, hey, could you write me a game in React and TypeScript? It's Asteroid, and this is what it did. So not bad, but the way that looks inside of the code, this was the actual code that it generated for me. And I was inspired by Matt, who did a really cool presentation on doing 3D video games in React. This is nowhere as sophisticated or as cool as what Matt was doing, but I do have this Asteroids video game here that I created using a large language model. And so, not bad, for AI, for an AI video game. But that is basically all the different demos that I had.
And how did you integrate this? I'm new to React. How do you integrate this video game into a web page?
So in this case, all I'm doing is I just created a functional component. So if you look at the very top of this, you can see I'm doing that same use client. I have this use ref and use effect in here. And so this is just, everything is wrapped inside of a functional component, right?
Oh.
So I'm just exporting that back out. And then if I go to my game page, I come back out here, find my game page. Here's my game page. I select that. You can see here that I am just importing that in as a component and just passing that inside of the page. So literally that's simple. Like I said, nowhere as cool as the stuff that Matt's working on.
You said you did it and you asked it to do it in JavaScript and TypeScript, so they both are.
Actually, the first thing I did was I asked it to write me, because I saw somebody did a demo where I said, hey, write Asteroids in JavaScript and HTML. And it did the video game and just so you could load it up inside of a straight HTML page. But it's like, I'm doing a demo on React. I'd like to do it in React. So then I asked it, can you do it in React? And I was like, okay, it could. And then I was like, I wonder if I could do it in TypeScript. And so then I asked it, can you try doing this in TypeScript? And it didn't do it perfectly. I did have to go through and make some fixes in there, specifically around the types. But it was close enough to where, I was able to do it like within a couple of minutes today. So that's, I thought that was pretty cool. All right, so.
Did that seem to be better results than you were getting from some of the other AI, like ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's continuously getting better. There's a game called Portal where I saw somebody had gotten the Rock to write a game in Portal, which is like a 3D game.
Yeah.
So pretty sophisticated. I wonder how far we are from like Doom 2. That's what I want. It's like I want my own Doom 2. Something else that it didn't do when I asked it to do the video game is it didn't have any sounds. So I did go and add my own sounds in there. But yeah, it's like that's what I find cool about a lot of the large language models is that they don't do like your whole job for you, but they make you a lot more productive. Like the time it would have taken me, that's like over 300 lines of code. It would have taken me a while to try to write, and I don't know anything about writing video games. So I'm a big, it's like throw into a database and then read it out. That's my world. So I haven't done like a lot of video games. I have been around long enough to see a lot of different downturns in this business. So when I originally started as a web developer, I picked to start right around the time of the .com crash. And so I had a friend that was working for a company at the time that was doing, basic, web applications. And, their business was starting to go downhill. And the CEO came in to the office one day and was like, hey, guess what? We're writing video games. And the company didn't last too much longer after that. So I have all this stuff is up on GitHub. I'm going to put the slides up there as well. They're not on the repo right now, but they will be. And then the link to that is that QR code right there. I also will be posting it out to the meetup page as well. So there'll be a copy of it there. Any questions? No? Yes.
I think I was thinking about something before when you were going over use transition. And I was trying to figure out the difference between use transition and use optimistic and, when to use them. What was the difference there?
Well, use transition is mainly a way that you can create asynchronous actions that you can use where you don't necessarily have to show anything to the end user right away, but you may want to keep track of whether or not that function's still pending. So there's a status that comes back off of that, then you can then apply to, let's say, your submit button as an example, because you don't want people to try to resubmit, the same record twice. And so what's really nice about that API is that not only does it handle the synchronous stuff for you, but it also gives you some state back that you can then use inside of your component to disable things if you need to. And then use optimistic is more for if you do need to update a value while you're waiting to get results back from the server. So one's asynchronous, one is more, it's like, okay, let's hold off on making more changes. We can set a value in there, but then we'll wait to give the final update until that action's completed running.
Right.
So it's kind of like with a database example, they have that whole ACID compliance stuff. If you're using like a relational database where, it's like, it won't actually complete the transaction until it knows that it's written to the file system for the database. So it's like, there's that kind of backup. It's not ACID compliant, the use optimistic, but it gives you a lot more, it gives you closer behavior to that. So
Makes sense. Thank you.
no problem. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Like I said, I'm planning on heading over to BJ's after the meeting tonight. So if anybody wants to get something to eat or drink with me, I'll be heading over there after the meeting. And then next month, Michael's going to be speaking on design systems. So I'm really excited to see that as well. And then if anybody else, if you have something that you're interested in speaking on and you want to get it onto the schedule, just let me know. I think the next meeting is, let's go to our meetup page. Let's see here.
Topics. You can't do the talk yourself, but you're like do the talk.
Actually, that's something that we've done as well. So it's like there's like, for instance, like I've had requests. It's like, like the first meeting that we did, or I think one of the first meetings I did, the first year I did a presentation on Express, but then we went like 5 years without doing anything Express related. And somebody was like, why don't you do Express? Because that's still a very popular, framework and stuff. And so we redid Express like 6 years later. And it was a very popular, presentation, but, I guess I narrowed it down to where we only do Express like every 5 years. So
But have you ever done like OWASP, like security best practices using forms in React? No.
not specific to nothing specific to OWASP and or security and React, but there is a an OWASP security user group here in Jacksonville. They usually meet, I think, I'm trying to remember if they meet next week or the first week of the month, but they do a pretty good job of going over all the security stuff. And we did have one presentation, was it right before the pandemic, where I had the CEO of Secure Ideas here to talk about like security, and that was also a popular meeting. So security is, especially nowadays, it's like, it seems like every couple of days, you'll see like a headline about, somebody that had their data stolen and stuff like that. So it's a very important topic, and so I'm sure we'll be covering again in the not so distant future.
The ideas come.
Yes. You had another question?
In case if I wanted to replace promises with observables RxJS, is that also in React or is it just not part of React?
So I think so one of the things that's interesting about React is that there's actually now a lot of frameworks that are based off of React or similar to React, but have this idea of signals. So I know like Signals has some similar functionality that you'd have like in RxJS. And so there's other frameworks and stuff like I believe Angular, I think Angular has the signals built in now. And then there's a couple other like React flavored frameworks that also have signals. I would be shocked if that's something that does not get added to the framework between now. But I do believe you can use RxJS with React. I don't think there's anything that prevents you from using RxJS inside of React. And so, I mean, it's one of the things, they're both considered kind of functional like frameworks. So yeah, I think that's probably a good combination. Redux is kind of a, it's kind of a functional, framework as well. But it doesn't have the same capabilities as Signals does. But yeah, I think that's going to be a good topic because I believe that Signals by themselves are going to be added to the standard web API specification. I'm not sure where that is on the roadmap, but that's definitely something, it's like one of the things conversations I've had with a coworker is that there wouldn't be all these alternative frameworks, if they didn't have, some good ideas. I'm a convert to React. Like I did not use React I started off using Angular and like Angular 1.0.
Angular 1.x forever.
Yes, and I got bitten on that. I was architect of a project at a company here in Jacksonville, and I decided to use Angular because that's what everybody was using in the enterprise at the time. And React was still kind of new. This would have been like maybe around 2014. So like React was like brand spanking new. And so we started this project using Angular, and then halfway through the project, the nice folks at Google came out and announced it's like, we're going to do an Angular 2.0, and it's not going to be backwards compatible with Angular 1.0. And then everybody just started, since I had chosen Angular as a framework, everybody kind of stared at me. It's like, what did you do to us? And I was like, because all this stuff was, it's like the alternative to Angular at the time, it's like there was like Backbone JS, and it's like the alternatives were not good. Like Angular, there's a reason why Angular was as popular as it was at the time. It's still fairly popular. So yeah, we've had some presentations on Angular as well, but yeah, that's the cool thing about this user group is we can talk about any of them, anything. So it doesn't have to be React specific. Yes.
Ember's still alive.
Yes, Ember's still alive. Yeah.
It's still a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to cast aspersions, but I do believe one of the reasons why Ember was as popular as it was because it was used heavily with the Ruby on Rails framework. Yeah, so it became very popular with Rails. But that's a beautiful thing about, you can use React with any framework. It doesn't have to be Next or JavaScript. It can be, Laravel or something else like that. So, or Ruby on Rails for that matter.
On the subject of Next, I think it's interesting. I'm happy to see that a lot of the things they had in Next have made their way back into React Core, right, into React Because, if you wanted to stay up to date with Next, it started to feel like they were getting over their skis a little bit, like, I'm gonna commit to learning these things, but I hope they do get adopted into like normal React stuff, just in case, you don't wanna like fully commit, you know?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember diving into the new Next stuff last year in a project, and I thought, man, I hope all this server components, server actions and all this like actually makes it, you know?
yeah.
It's not throwaway knowledge if I decide to move away from Next, and so it's nice to see that they're incorporating it into the 19.
What's it called in football where you have like the defense will jump over the line before offsides? It's like sometimes it feels like if you were to think of like the React team and the next team is like football teams and stuff like that. So a lot of times the next JS team will be offsides, because like they tend to jump the gun
Yeah.
on a lot of stuff. So like I got real scared end of last year because they had released Next 15 with a beta version of React 19. And it's like I can't go to production. I can't go to my company and say I'm going to production using a beta version of React. I had this meeting at the company. I talked about this a little earlier, and I said it's like they haven't, it's still beta and stuff like that. And literally a couple hours later, the React team announced the official release of React 19. So we got a good laugh about that. I don't feel anywhere there. I was actually being safer as opposed to like when I used Angular JS. Yeah, because now it's just Angular, but it was started off Angular 1.0 was Angular JS, and so yeah, you work long enough, you've been burnt by technology, and so you learn to try to avoid being burnt by technology. Yes, Michael.
So what I'm curious about React 19, I was reading up on server components and now it's like server-side rendered by default.
Yes,
And I was just curious.
if you're using the app router. If you're using the app router, you can still use the pages router in Next, which is a,
Well, no, I'm not talking about Next. I was just reading up on React 19.
okay, yeah.
It looks like it's server-side rendered by default. So my kind of what I'm curious about is you used to be able to like serve React statically on like an S3 bucket, and I wonder if like how you would do that now. And I think what I would guess is you would just go to the app, the top level app TSX, and you would just put use client and it would cascade
Yeah.
all the way down.
So just as a frame of reference, let me show you what happens when I go to do a build. So if I come out here to the command line, yeah.
Next also do is similar.
Yeah, so if I come over here and I say npm run build, and we go to run this, we can see here it's actually going through here and it's generating all the static pages. So anything that it can generate and deploy statically even comes here and gives you all the different routes available for the app when you go to run the build. So you can see right here, these are all the different routes that are created.
In Next though, right?
This is next, yeah. But I mean, it's using React. So the beautiful thing about this is that for each one of these specific routes, when it's going to do the first load JS, you can see that these are all down to just a little over 100 kilobytes. So it really, instead of having to load the entire application on the first page request, you're only loading up what you need per page route. So that's the nice thing about it.
Still serve it statically as long as you.
Yes, you can set up your Next.js app so it's completely static. So if you need to host it like an S3 bucket, you can do it. If you want to use it instead of Gatsby as an example, you can do that. You can even take advantage of, I believe, like edge functions as well. So that's something else that was popularized by Vercel. Vercel is the company that sponsors Next.js, and they tend to put a lot of features in there, which tend to work really well on Vercel, but don't necessarily work very well on other platforms. And one of those is edge functions. And the whole idea of edge functions is that it used to be like when you're going to build out your application, you'd have all these different assets like JavaScript files, CSS files that you might want to be delivered as close to the client as possible. And so they have these edge networks, CDNs, where you can essentially basically have all these static assets, as close to the browser as possible. And then one of the innovations that's been making recently is this whole idea of that on top of doing that, you can also do edge functions where you can use certain JavaScript that will run on their edge networks, but they don't run like a full version of Node. So there's certain things like with like crypto as an example. Like I'm talking about cryptology, not the fake money. So you can actually do, for instance, if you need to do like some type of like authentication or hashing or something like that, that's not going to run well on the edge networks. But regular standard JavaScript, if you need to do, let's say, a request to like another server or to a database that doesn't require crypto, you can do that using the edge network, and you can still host like most of your application can be hosted, statically. But then you can have these edge functions and stuff that can do, updates and stuff for your application. Yeah.
One thing on the RxJS thing, date myself here, if you go back and Google code of the 13, 14, like the first 2 years, it was Chris Mars, I think. Did a talk on functional reactive programming, React using RxJS. It was a thing at one point, but functional reactive programming seems to have just kind of died off too.
So promises is the way to go with React. Promises is the way to go with React. Generally,
Well, now, so here's the thing that's nice about modern JavaScript is that you can use a seek and await. And if you're using a seek and await or asynchronous functions, those are essentially our promises. And so it's really simplified, the ability, like, promises are nice, but it's definitely better than, promises are better than error first callbacks, which is the way we used to do asynchronous stuff in Node. But they're still not as easy as just doing a regular async await with try catch at it. So that's what I use. The examples that I put online is like I have these promises that I've written, but they're all async and await functions. So they're asynchronous functions with awaits in them. But behind the scenes, those are just promises in the node world.
With RxJS, it's just a library. I did a quick Google and it looks like you can just npm install and use it.
Yep.
RxJS is useful if you wanted to do like really intricate promise cancellation. If you wanted to do like really kind of complex things with your network.
no, but like what he was asking, like the debounds, like also that button double click.
Yeah.
All this is out of the box with RxJS,
Yeah.
right? So that all becomes like straightforward. Also streaming, right? So if basically, let's assume there is a child and a server component. And if child component refreshes, then the observable will be alive until you unsubscribe.
Yeah.
It will keep on calling the same code. So if there is something changed, like if on your page, the route changed, you can always subscribe to it and it will execute it again, right?
This is a great framework, and it's inspired like a lot of other frameworks. So there's like even in different languages, there's like RX Java, RX Swift is an example. And the company I was working at in 2023, we're doing everything natively iOS, and we're using Swift. But what we were doing was we're using a framework called Combine, which essentially it's modeled almost exactly after the RX library. So it's very handy if you need to stream and transform things as they're being delivered. So it's a very functional framework. It's probably something that it deserves its own presentation here at the Jaxnode.
RxJS with Angular 9 and Angular 10 back in the day, and I wrote a blog post on it, right? But I was really inspired by some other posts. But my takeaway with RxJS was everything's there, like you say, in the API, but you have to know to call those functions and use it. And most of us that were using Angular, we were just subscribing and just doing a very.
I know.
So you still have to kind of know what you're doing.
Correct.
But yeah, it is a little different though when you're kind of using your own debounce function.
Yep.
Dash.
Yeah, if you want a framework, I don't know if it's still out there. You remember Cycle? Dave? You ever come across that?
No, I haven't.
Cycle.js, that it didn't gain traction because the creator of the library was kind of a jackass. in the community. He did not, Tom Dale kind of did it to Ember.
Oh, okay.
You know, he kind of made a lot of enemies. The guy behind Cycle, looks like it's still around.
I remember hearing that one.
Yeah, he went way over the, I mean, he's not wrong. It's just a lot of really high level FRP concepts that it's not easy for regular developers to grok, but that right there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's truly functional.
Well, the joke about JavaScript is that it's the worst functional programming language, but it's the one that everybody uses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You done any Elm?
Like their back in the day, I don't know one app.
I went to a